Good evening, worshippers. So by now, you should have started reading Plato's Symposium. As you read it, you'll see that it is an absolutely beautiful dialogue. It is very, very finely crafted. And it is important not only for its literary merits, but for the philosophy that we find there as well. The book begins in the middle of a conversation between Glaucon and Apollodorus. Glaucon asks Apollodorus about what happened on that night of a dinner party that was given by Agathon to celebrate his first victory in a dramatic competition. The dialogue is going to present us with 7 speeches on love. Some of them are more remarkable than others. And the last speech by Alcibiades is really more drama than speech. And one of the things that you need to do as you're reading the book is to think about how these speeches work together. How is one speech critiquing the other speech? And in particular, with regard to that last speech by Alcibiades, what you need to look at is how that drama that is being presented by Alcibiades exhibits some of the ideas in the other speeches. Who are the 7 characters who are going to give speeches? The first one is Phaedrus, an Athenian aristocrat. The second one is Pausanias, a legal expert. Eryximachus is the third, and he's a physician. And we have Aristophanes, he's a comic playwright. Agathon, the tragic poet, he's the host of the banquet. We have Socrates, and we know who he is. And then finally, at the end, we're going to have Alcibiades, a prominent Athenian statesman, orator, and general. Before I talk about what Socrates says about love, I want to briefly make some remarks on some of the other speeches. Not all of them, but a few of them. The first one to take note of is that by Pausanias. And there are a few things. What's most interesting about Pausanias' speech is that it's going to give you a lot of information about what was going on in ancient Greece with regard to the practice of pederasty. And this was the practice where an older man would take a younger man under his wing and teach him virtue, introduce him to society and so forth, all the while having sexual relations with this young man. And it is in the context of this practice of pederasty that there's a discussion of love. Why is this? Part of it is that in ancient Greece, women were basically not at all in the public sphere. They were considered inferior. They were considered not to have the intellect of, not to be the equal of a man. They were considered more like children. So if you wanted to have a real relationship, a real friendship, a real flourishing friendship with somebody, you had to do it with a man. Now, in his speech, Pausanias makes a distinction between 2 kinds of love, one having to do with common Aphrodite, and the other one having to do with the love of heavenly Aphrodite. So I want to read you just this section. It's at 181b. He tells us, "Now the common Aphrodite's love is himself truly common. As such, he strikes whenever he gets a chance. This, of course, is the love felt by the vulgar, who are attached to women no less than to boys, to the body more than to the soul, and to the least intelligent partners, since all they care about is completing the sexual act. Whether they do it honorably or not is of no concern. That is why they do whatever comes their way, sometimes good, sometimes bad, and which one it is incidental to their purpose. For the love who moves them belongs to a much younger goddess, who through her parentage partakes of the nature of both the female and the male. Contrast this with the love of heavenly Aphrodite. This goddess, whose descent is purely male, hence this love is for boys, is considerably older and therefore free from the lewdness of youth. That's why those who are inspired by her love are attracted to the male. They find pleasure in what is by nature stronger and more intelligent. Two things to note. First, the incredible sexist practices of ancient Greek society. Women were just not allowed in the public sphere. They were considered inferior. And this is reflected in Pausanias' speech. This is really important in the dialogue itself, as we'll see later on. Secondly, we have here this distinction between a vulgar love and a higher love. That should be separated from the sexist presuppositions that Pausanias makes. And as we read through the dialogue, we need to reflect on this distinction between the vulgar love, which is a love that is just basically physical for the body, and a higher love that has to do with the whole individual, with the intellect, with the moral development of the individual, and so forth. So that's something that is worthwhile, even if we get rid of all of the sexist presuppositions in Pausanias' speech. The second speech that I'd like to draw your attention to is that of Aristophanes. And that speech is part of what makes this dialogue an absolute literary masterpiece. It is hilarious. So I'm just going to read you a little bit of it, but the whole speech is quite funny. So this is what Aristophanes tells us. First, you must learn what human nature was in the beginning and what happened to it since, because long ago our nature was not that what it is now, but very different. There were three kinds of human beings. That's my first point. Not two as there are now, male and female. In addition to these, there was a third, a combination of those two. Its name survives, though the kind itself has vanished. At that time, you see, the word androgynous really meant something, a form made up of male and female elements, though now there's nothing but the word, and that's used as an insult. My second point is that the shape of each human being was completely round, with back and sides in a circle. They had 4 hands each, as many legs as hands, and 2 faces exactly alike on a rounded neck. Between the 2 faces, which were on opposite sides, was 1 head with 4 ears. There were 2 sets of sexual organs, and everything else was the way you'd imagine it from what I've told you. They walked upright, as we do now, whatever direction they wanted, and whenever they set out to run fast, they thrust out all their 8 limbs, the ones they had then, and spun rapidly, the way gymnasts do cartwheels, by bringing their legs around straight. So these creatures were quite powerful, and they became quite proud, and apparently stormed heaven. Zeus had to do something about this, and he finally came up with a plan. His plan was to split them in 2. So let me read you a little bit about this here. I think I have a plan, he said, that would allow human beings to exist and stop their misbehaving. They will give up being wicked when they lose their strength. So I shall now cut each of them in 2. At one stroke, they will lose their strength and also become more profitable to us, owing to the increase in their number. They shall walk upright on 2 legs. But if I find they still run riot and do not keep the peace, he said, I will cut them in 2 again, and they'll have to make their way on 1 leg, hopping. So, the story that Aristophanes presents is why it is that human beings always feel incomplete and they are always looking for their other half. And it's a very, pretty long speech and extremely funny. So just read that. So I'd like to begin talking now about some of the philosophical issues that we find in the Symposium. These begin to turn up with Agathon's speech. This is at 195a. Agathon tells us that we must be able to identify the qualities of love, what qualities those are that enable love to behave in the way that love does. So he says, you must explain what qualities in the subject of your speech enable him to give the benefits for which we praise him. Praise him first for what he is. And then Agathon goes on to say that love is happy, young, delicate. Violence never touches love. Love is just, temperate, and brave, and concludes that love is himself the most beautiful and the best. Now, this sets up Socrates' speech in very interesting ways. When we see Socrates coming on the scene, we're going to see a lot of Socratic irony. What is Socratic irony? Socrates is going to be praising Agathon in one breath and criticizing him in the same breath. So we'll see how he does that. So Socrates praises Agathon's speech. He says that it is a speech delivered with such beauty and variety. But again, his praises contain a hidden and damning critique. One of the things that alerts us to this, he says that I was afraid that Agathon would end by sending the Gorgian head. And this is a pun. It is a pun that references this Gorgian head that would turn people into stone, but at the same time is a reference to the sophist Gorgias. So a reference to sophistry, and we've already looked at what the sophists were doing and what Socrates was doing in relation to the sophists. So Socrates, in his speech, he's going to tell us that he knows nothing whatever of this business, namely of love. So he begins by telling us that he knows nothing. On the other hand, even though he knows nothing, he tells us that while what Agathon says is very beautiful, it is just not true. He does not know the truth. Agathon is correct, he says, to insist that we need to explain the qualities of love, what is love, such that it behaves the way that it does, but he completely misunderstands the nature of love, very much in the way that he misunderstood the nature of love when he was a young man. Now, this brings us to another important literary point, and that is that Socrates does not present what he knows about love as his own wisdom. Instead, it is the wisdom that he gained from the woman Diotima of Manatea. And that is very, very ironic, because of course we've already seen throughout the dialogue that if anyone loves a woman, it must be through this inferior kind of love, because women are supposedly, they only have the mind of children. And so if you love a woman, you can only love her not for her intelligence or for her moral qualities, but only out of lust, right? So there had been these views that we saw already by Pausanias that put forward this view of love, the lower kind of love having to do with women. And then all of a sudden we see that, in fact, even Socrates himself did not understand the true nature of love. He had to get it from a woman. So men can at best achieve then what the rhetoricians achieve. That is, they spar with one another with regard to beautiful words and so forth. But of the truth, they know nothing. They are unable to get at the deeper mysteries. And this is especially the case given the nature of the deeper mysteries, as we'll see, as they are presented to us by Diotima. Socrates is going to begin his discussion of the nature of love with a critique on Agathon's views. Now, what did Agathon tell us? Agathon said that love was this thing that is just beautiful. It had all these wonderful qualities. And Socrates is going to say, love is not like that. Actually, love is really a relational concept. So he says, love is the love of something. And if love is the love of something, then it is relational. And then he comes up with the insight that love desires what it lacks. And he understands love then in terms of desire. Love then is going to be the desire for beauty. And if love desires beauty, it cannot have beauty, since desire is a need. And if it is a need, it looks for that which it lacks. So this shows us then that Agathon is wrong. Love is not beautiful, but lacks beauty. It desires beauty, or it needs beauty, and it's therefore of the character of desire. Love is a need of both beautiful and good things. And then we get introduced to the story of Diotima, who is the one who gave Socrates all of these insights. And she tells him, look, Socrates, just because love is not beautiful, this does not mean he's ugly. And very, very importantly, because this is a very deep insight here, she's going to compare love with true belief. It's going to have the character, she says, of true belief. And true belief is something in between wisdom on the one hand and ignorance on the other. So at 202a, she tells us, with regard to what true belief is, she says, it's judging things correctly without being able to give a reason. Surely this is not the same as knowing, for how could knowledge be unreasoning? So now, in epistemology, we say, what is knowledge? And usually the response is, or the first response is, that knowledge is justified true belief. So when we talk about just having true belief, we have correct beliefs, but we can't give an account of why we have those beliefs. We just somehow believe they're true, and we can't give an account for it. Now, just as judging things correctly without being able to give a reason is in between knowing, knowledge, and unreason, in the same way, love is in between being beautiful and being ugly. It's neither being beautiful, it's not neither beautiful nor ugly. And it has some characters similar to that justified belief. Why? Because love somehow desires the beautiful, therefore has an understanding of what it lacks. And by the way, he's going to be talking about that which has the most beauty, which is wisdom itself. So this desire, this love that he is ultimately talking about, is the love of wisdom, namely philosophy. This desire then is attracted to the beautiful. And it's not completely ignorant. It can't be, because he says that those who are completely ignorant don't even have a sense of what it is that they lack, and so they're just satisfied with themselves. And in this way, desire is going to be very much akin or analogous to this true belief. Because desire desires what it does not have, and yet it does not possess it. It does not understand it completely, but it knows that it lacks it. He's going to tell us that it is somehow in between wisdom and ignorance. This love is somehow in between the two. Why? Because no one else who is wise already loves wisdom. So if you already possess it, you don't desire it, because you don't desire what you already have. On the other hand, this desire cannot be completely ignorant, because otherwise, if the person were completely ignorant, he would not understand, again, why he should desire what he desires. There's a sense in which, of course, he doesn't. There's a sense in which desire as emotion is pointed at the right object, but it cannot yet give an account of why it desires what it desires, or why it should desire what it desires. Now, I had said pointed in the right direction, and that actually is going to bring up lots of questions. In what sense is it pointed in the right direction? Is it always pointed in the right direction? Can't we love things that are not really good? So we need to think about that. How can persons have bad desires? And these are questions that come up through all of this. Now, interestingly enough, the discussion regarding love, the love is desire for good and beautiful things, turns into a discussion regarding the desire for happiness. So how does this happen? If we possess good and beautiful things, we become happy. But now she's going to say, Diotima tells us that every desire for good things or for happiness is the supreme and treacherous love. What does this mean? It means that the desire for happiness can be pursued in many different ways. So she mentions, for instance, that it can be pursued through making money or through the love of sports or through philosophy. Is this then real love? And she's going to say it is not the true kind of love, because you can have desire for things that are not ultimately perfectly good, but you think that that those things are going to somehow fulfill you, that they're going to somehow make you happy. So you pursue them as you pursue your happiness. But that's not what real love is. Who are the real lovers? They are, according to Diotima, those that love the good. And she says at 206b that love is wanting to pursue the good forever. And after this account is given is where she begins her famous account of love being actually, it is giving birth in beauty, whether in body or in soul. At this point, I think I'm going to conclude the video. It's already over 22 minutes long. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a discussion on Blackboard. I'll give you the instructions for it. And if there are any questions or comments, I would like you to put those there. And then in the next video, what I'll do is I'll go on about what it means to give birth in beauty, the significance of the symposium in the context of Plato's larger thought, and also a little bit about Alcibiades' speech at the end. And that would then conclude our work with the symposium, and we will begin our work on the Republic after that. Thank you very much, and good night.